was killed the next Saturday. We went to their graduation. They went to Stetson undergraduate, and then they both went to Mercer Law School. They graduated on a Sunday afternoon. We moved them back to Sarasota. Rob had a job with John Dent. I'm not sure that I can remember exactly, but Lisa was at Nelson Hesse. And he was killed the next Saturday.
Yeah.
And Kim graduated from law school. Well, she was in Pepperdine, and she came home for the funeral, and she went back to Pepperdine in September, and they let her come back in December.
I see.
And she spent her last semester with Earl Moreland.
Okay.
So she never went back. She went back and took her test. Of course, you know, Kim is so, she just graduated from Pepperdine, and she
Okay. We're all set. You just gonna talk to Bruce and tell him to come out here.
So, I understand, let's talk about a little bit about when you first met Mabry. You were working at the Bank of Wauchula, I think?
Yes, I was working with the Cruz family. Mr. J.W. Cruz Sr. actually hired me. The Cruz family are still in banking today, but I started working for the family in 1955. And
how'd you come to meet Mabry?
and he graduated with some of the girls that worked at the bank, and they introduced me to Mabry. And 1961 we got married, and I moved out here, which was quite a change for me. I had thought I was a country girl until I came out here. The first time I came out here, he brought me out here. The first words out of my mouth is, "I could never live out there." Well, less than a year later, I was out here. Quit my great job that I had, because back in those days, it was not a mobile society, so you would have never thought about driving an hour to work or something. So I quit my job, and here I was out here.
Where was your first house on the ranch?
The little house that you came down the road is still there, a little greenhouse, and it was a tiny house, no air condition. Of course, I wasn't used to air conditioning at the time, but it was just a very small house. And so I ended up just going with Mabry to work just about every day, because I didn't have anything to do, stay in a house. I'd worked all my life, so.
Was State Road 72 paved then?
Absolutely not even a road. It was a path. It was not even a graded road with ditches or anything. And people that would drive down this part of it, was called Gill Road at the time, would get stuck if it rained. There was nothing that resembled a road at all.
So you pretty much were to get to Arcadia and then to Wauchula?
Went back and forth to Wauchula because we had groves up there that Mabry was continually going up there, so I would go up there with him and go to Arcadia. It was closer for groceries and things back in those days.
So then, even though is the whole ranch in Sarasota County?
Yes.
And how big is it?
Well, at that time it was about 17,952 acres when I came out here.
And was it all in Sarasota County?
Yes.
But the life you lived was pretty much oriented to the east and the north, not
yes,
Sarasota so much.
Not so much to Sarasota. Mail it still does come from the Arcadia Postal Service, and you had to go all the way to the county line to get your mail. Sarasota County, we were like the lost people out here. What few people were out here. You didn't have a road, and the mail didn't even come to your house, and there was no telephone. But I did tell Mabry that I would not marry him unless he got a telephone out here. There was no telephone service, and he had to go to Tallahassee and get the franchise taken out of one telephone company and put in another one that would agree to put a telephone line out here. And he got all that done, and then we came out here. We had no telephone, we didn't have mail service, and it was quite different than what it is today.
Quite pioneering. Really.
Yeah. Yes, it was to me.
And then, had the open range
It was,
closed?
no, there was fences, everything was fenced. I heard stories about the open range from Mabry because his grandfather owned quite a bit of properties when they started buying the land and putting up fences.
And where did they take cattle to slaughter?
Well, most of the ranches out in the eastern part of the county, and I think maybe it's true throughout Sarasota County at that time, and now we were like what they called a cow-calf operation, where you sold calves, and you would go to the market, then they would buy them as calves and send them out west and put them in feedlots and finish them out. We never did finish out cows, but there was a few ranches along. The Harrison family were very much involved in butchering cattle back when I first came. I heard stories about that. So there was a few of those operations around, but most of the ranchers operated on a cow-calf operation.
So when was State Road 72 built?
State Road 72 was built, and it had, in the last few years before 61, had been repaved and kind of made a better road. There wasn't much of a road there before then. In the early, late 50s and all, they had redone 72, so you had a pretty good road, but it wasn't always, it hadn't been done for years.
Right. And so was that pretty much when you started making more of a connection with Sarasota?
Well, Mabry was always involved in knowing what was going on in Sarasota. It was just that his parents were, you know, he had groves in Wauchula. Finally, when he got an airplane, he would fly up there, and that made us have a better life of going to Sarasota, because he would just fly from here to to Wauchula, tend to his business, and then fly back home, so you didn't have to make the round trip of driving up there and driving back. It made it so much more efficient for him with the airplane.
Sure, yeah. And then what sort of got him involved with Sarasota County? And I know he was on the planning commission.
Yes, and he was on, he just, I think as, when I first married Mabry, he was involved with the legislature, and had been going to the legislature when they met for several years before I met him. And when I met him, he served as an unpaid aide during the legislative session to State Representative Chesterfield Smith, and he was great friends with Chesterfield Smith, and so every session of the legislature Mabry would attend with no taxpayer money involved, pay his own way, and stay in Tallahassee for a couple of months just to attend the legislative session to see what bills was of interest to him as in ag or whatever, and he served as unpaid aide. And then the year that we got married, the legislature met every other year in those days. He got me a job working with Chesterfield Smith he was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and then Mabry worked for Senator Williams, who represented Hardy County. So we both had paying jobs that we could go to the legislature. And we went up and rented us a house, and so we stayed up there for 2 months. That would have been in probably 62, I think. And I worked on the Appropriations Committee. I actually helped type on a typewriter the State Appropriations Committee bill. We worked all night. They kept making changes, and we would go back, and we had to, I didn't have a typewriter. I think the regular committee secretary had something resemble something you could go back and correct, but I had to paint out or go back and cross out any correction, and they kept changing the amount of money they were going to put on the bill. And I remember I kept that bill for years.
Carbon copy looked
we had carbon copies and everything, yes. Yeah. So we worked up there that year, and then that was the last year that we attended. But he became interested in the legislature first, and then he later, of course, decided to run for the seat, but there had been a reapportionment in Sarasota County. Mostly was taken out of the district, and it was just a little part of it left in a district with DeSoto, Highlands, and Charlotte County.
So were Kim and Lisa born up in Tallahassee?
No, they, after that session of legislature, that was in '62, Lisa was born in '64, and that sort of stopped us going to Tallahassee when we had a child, and then maybe just did his interest in local interest. I mean, he was very interested in the legislature and the Greenbelt tax law that was coming into effect, and he was always looking ahead at what other issues was going to be an issue. And I can remember that he always thought water was the critical thing. He used to say, I'd rather control your water than your oil. People complained about the long gas lines, and he would say, it's the water that we need to worry about.
So isn't that really what led him to be the leader to
yes, he saw a real
acquire the
need.
MacArthur?
Yeah, he used to say, I remember he got criticized when he was running for the county commission. A lady came up to me and she said, your husband seems to be interested in what's going to happen 20 years from now. Why does he care about what's happening today? And I said, well, to repeat what he said, he always thought that you had to look ahead, and you didn't plan for something when it was happening. You should have already known it was going to happen and planned likewise for it. And I think the water he saw as a critical need for this county.
So that was sort of anticipating the long-term need for the
Long-term.
county. Was like anticipating the closing of the open range. Figuring out
Yes,
how the family-
absolutely. You have to have foresight to see, which is, I think a lot of people today would see that's still what's wrong with our government, is that we just constantly put out fires. We don't plan ahead of time to see what future things we could be doing today, and I think that's still true.
You know, Mabry was obviously famous, well-known for conservation efforts and acquisition of Ringling MacArthur tract, but he never seemed to be against growth.
No, he thought there was a balance, that each growth and conservation could go together, and you just learn to to preserve your wetlands and still have growth in reasonable areas. And I think he was very well balanced in his view that property rights was certainly an issue with him. He was so strong on property rights that when you own property, just because you didn't develop your property today, and then 10 years down the line somebody said, well, you can't develop it because we were trying to, but he thought that you had a certain right to property, whether you kept it in ag or developed it, you had certain rights, and that you should be allowed to, it shouldn't be taken away from you.
What would you say is Mabry's greatest legacy to the community?
I think his foresight in seeing issues that were going to be problems down the road and trying to take care of them before they became critical. He saw that if growth was going to be maintained in Sarasota County, that the water situation was going to be an issue unless you took care of it. And it didn't mean that he was always right on everything, but I think he saw that if you worked together and took care of these issues before they became critical, if you had a big development going in and then they say, well, you can't do it because you don't have the water. He always said there's plenty of water. There's not any cheap water, but there's plenty of water, and we just need to look ahead and conserve the water where you can and have it ready for development. You've got to provide water.
That's great. What would you say? What would you like to say to the Argus Foundation for recognizing Mabry?
I'm truly honored that they have decided to honor Mabry. I think that he contributed a lot to their sustaining growth of what their policies are and helping development, balance development with the preservation of lands where it's needed, and yet having the resources to have development in preserving people's property rights. That's not said as well as he could say it, but
Well, I think it's a great honor that he's being,
but our family are really grateful for this honor. We're happy to be here.
great, okay. I think that's great. You're good. You done good.
No, I,
You're not the first
and
one
you
to-
know, you have very few things.
And Barbara. Lamar represented the Sarasota County Cattlemen's Association and their Greenbelt law before the Board of Adjustment, so the Sarasota County Tax Board of Adjustment. And on that board, the Sarasota County Cattlemen's were Buss, Mabry, Buck Hawkins, Dow Dort, and others. So they appeared. John Mikos was the tax collector at the time, and he wanted their properties to be assessed differently, apart from the Greenbelt law. And so they had about 3 years running of contesting the tax collector's assessment. And we were all in the room, and we packed the room, and women, men, everybody, for 3 solid years, and were ultimately successful.
In the passage of the Greenbelt? Exemption?
In the observance of the
Oh,
Greenbelt. It was
maintaining
already a
it.
law.
Maintaining it,
Yeah,
okay.
Mikos wanted to assess their property differently. And I probably should tell that story without his name. But that's how, without saying his name.
Everybody knows that's what gentleman's all about.
Okay, all right. And then the other one that was real formative for me was I had just published my first book on Sarasota Manatee history. And I interviewed Mabry a lot for that book because he knew so much. And he was already a friend. And Mabry decided, Mary Nalmy decided, Anna Mae Sandergan decided that I needed to be on the Sarasota County Historical Commission. And I knew what those boards were like, and I said, no, thank you. And I said, no, thank you. And I said, thanks, no thanks. And they had Mabry call me, and he appointed me. And he called me and said, no, thank you, it's not an acceptable answer. And so for 3 years, that time, we pushed for a brand new Sarasota County Historical Commission in makeup and required professional qualifications for the staff. And that was very, very controversial. And Mabry championed that through.
Why was that controversial? I don't recall that.
Well, we're not running yet, right?
Yeah, we are. We have that all the time.
Okay. Well, because a lot of little old ladies, like the 2 young guys who hadn't even gone to college, who were running the thing.
I
We
see.
actually built
Professional.
qualifications as defined by the Secretary of the Interior's standards for professional qualifications in the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. So we observed that, and that's the standard almost every county and city observe.
Right. What, you know, Mabry was obviously instrumental in acquisition of the Ringling MacArthur tract and long-term conservation view, but he was he was never against growth and watching Sarasota County grow.
Control growth,
Right.
yeah. No, he was a real champion in that. And Lamar represented the MacArthurs in that whole thing.
So did I.
He was with Bill Kirby.
Right.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Bill Kirby, what a character. He was the MacArthur lawyer.
He was general counsel of the foundation. Right.
And he knew Mr. MacArthur well, and Mr. MacArthur would not spend money on himself. So he had some old airplane that they would fly around that tract to look at, and everywhere else they owned property. And he said his life was at risk because the plane was so cheap And so updated, and that was the way MacArthur did. Bill Kirby represented the guy who invented the Tucker car, which was a whole movie, and there's a guy in it who plays Tucker. And he dated Ann Landers. We got to know him pretty well. Did you?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because neither he nor Landers drank, and they both loved to dance.
Do you know what he said? It said on the back of his watch?
No.
Love Essie,
Oh,
which
cute.
is her real name.
Yeah, cute. So I had one other story, and then
good.
you guys can use any of this you want.
Yeah. No,
Or
that's
is that
good.
okay?
Yeah.
You talk to Bruce, I'll pretend like I'm not here.
Okay, so two other stories really come to mind about Mabry that I think are unusual. In their commissioner offices in the 1920s Charles Railing Terrace Hotel, they were on the 10th floor, and Mabry had fastened to the floor, bolted to the floor, a 10-story rope ladder, and it was always coiled in a corner by the wall. And if you ever ask him about it, he said, everybody laughs at me about that, but if we have a fire in this building, they're all going to try to beat me down my own rope ladder.
Do we have pictures of that?
I don't know. I've never heard that story.
Lisa said she'd never heard it, but Barbara confirmed it this morning, and it was bolted to the floor.
I'll be darned.
It was, I met with him a lot of times there, and that was always,
Was it in his office?
yes, it was visible, it was coiled up.
That's funny.
It was very funny. I mean, who but a cattleman would think of that
Right.
kind of thing? So let me tell you one, and this will be my last one. Just a few days before Mabry's plane went down and he died, he was, my Venice book had just been published. And on a beautiful sunny Sunday afternoon at Eagle Point Club, the Venice Friends of the Library had a book event, so unveiling the book. And Jim Smith was Secretary of State at the time, and he was supposed to do the keynote address and unveil it. They'd become friends when Lamar was with the governor's office and Bob Graham's office in Tallahassee. And it was a beautiful day in Sarasota, but the state plane was weathered in Tallahassee. And so Mabry talked to Jim Smith on Lamar's cell phone to find out what Smith was going to say. And he got all set so he could do the Jim Smith remarks for Jim Smith in his absence. And Lamar was running around Eagle Point with our Super 8 camera. And he came up to Mabry after Mabry had used his cell phone. And Mabry said, Lamar, I just called Saudi Arabia and talked to all my friends on your cell phone, and you're going to get the bill. His plane went down within 10 days after that.
Oh,
What a guy. What a character.
God. You know, Lamar and I were with him the day before he died. The last thing he did in Sarasota, we were at Dick Nelson's office, negotiating or help working on the acquisition for the MacArthur truck.
Wow.
And
Incredible.
I'll never forget waking up the next day and reading the paper. I was just devastated.
I was with a child, we were in Williamsburg looking at colleges, and I got the phone call. I just couldn't believe it. Just didn't make any sense
Didn't make any sense.
at all.
Yeah.
So what else do you want to cover? Those were the things that came to mind for me.
Yeah, that's fine. I think
Okay.
that's great. That's
Do you want to
great.
cover, let's do the first two again, just because she was sort of looking at her
Yeah,
paper.
why don't you tell, what was the first one again about,
So the first one, now let me look down 1 second and get all this stuff right.
You try to keep it brief.
That's impossible.
Remember, this is a short video.
we'll edit, but go ahead.
Lamar was representing the Sarasota County Cattlemen's Association over protecting them from the John Micos efforts to not comply with the Greenbelt law with regard to their property assessments. So for, I think, 3 years in a row, they appeared before the Tax Adjustment Board, which was several county commissioners and several school board members. And it was very tense, and it was very difficult. And of course, a lot of money was at stake. So for like 3 years in a row, they did that until they successfully protected it, and John had to go with the Greenbelt Law.
And Mabry was the leader of that.
Mabry was in it along with Buss, along with Dallas Dort and others. So that was that's when I really got to know how much Mabry knew about Sarasota history and how many generations and all that.
Okay.
And after that, I never wrote a book without consulting him,
Yeah.
often at home. Just knew a lot and
Yeah.
cared.
Yeah,
He liked
did.
it.
What was the second one you did?
The second one I did was the Sarasota County Historical
Yeah,
Commission.
do that one.
Is that interesting?
Yes.
Okay. Mabry's friendship and close alliance over history, accurate history, led to another chapter in my life, which was really the beginning of being on public boards and commissions. And Mary Nalmy and Anna Mae Sandergan wanted me to be with them on the Sarasota County Historical Commission. And I knew about local boards and commissions. I knew how heavy they could get into acrimony. And I had just finished my first book, and I didn't want to do it. So I said, thank you very much, but no thank you. And I insisted, no thank you. And they got Mabry to call me and tell me why yes was the only acceptable answer. And so for several years we championed rewriting the law, the ordinance, so that the Sarasota County Historical Commission followed the outlines of the National Historic Preservation Act and the Secretary of the Interior standards. And it was controversial, but it passed. He championed it.
Perfect.
Was that better, Mr. Yeagley?
Yes.
Okay.
You want to just say something briefly about how great it is that Argus is honoring Mabry?
I don't know very much about Argus.
All right.
Oh, no, I can say that. I don't think you're going to need it, though. You've got all these other people. But I think it's very appropriate for Argus to be honoring Mabry. But everybody's going to say that. We all think that.
Okay.
Okay.
But we go to all their community meetings and all that sort of thing.
So Alan, talk a little bit about how you met Mabry and came to know him and what your relationship was.
Well, I met Mabry a long time ago. You know, our ranch is 3.5 miles across from here, straight as the crow flies from here. And we bought our first cows, heifers from Buster, Longino, who I'm hoping shows up. And half of them went home, went through the fence, and went back to Buster's. Of course, they didn't make it all the way, and so some of them wound up on Mabry's, and we recovered some of those, or he did, brought them back to us. The other half that got away went in the park, and they died of old age in the park. We went in there with, I think it was 7 cowboys on horses and 5 dogs, or vice versa, and ran them for 2 days and a night and got a couple. Killed one and got a couple more. And that's when the palmettos were head high in the park. I mean, it was Katie bar the door to get anything, drive anything through the park then.
Right.
And the park was our neighbor then on 2 fences, on our west and our south fence, and we couldn't get them to maintain the fence or even plow a fire line. They burned. That's how we lost our cows. They burned our fence down, and so that was.
Were they doing a controlled burn?
No,
Oh, just when it caught fire.
it just caught fire, and well, their controlled burns were as bad as a lightning strike. I mean, they didn't plow fire lines or anything. It was up to us. And of course, it doesn't do any good if you plowed a fire line on your side of the fence. Still going to burn your fence down. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of wild times. And Mabry helped me a little bit getting people to work for me that knew the woods and stuff like that. And then when I, went back to college and got my degree in journalism and started working for the Herald Tribune, of course, I got to know Mabry through his political activities and one thing and the other. And when he was elected to the county commission, he and I, of course, had a lot in common because we both could talk cows and cow business and all that sort of thing. And then I came down and rode with him and did a special for the Herald Tribune on the old-time way of doing cowboying, which Mabry did, and we still do to a large degree. And rode and roped with him and everything, and that went really, really well. And he liked the fact that I knew what I was writing about and, knew the business. And in fact, our photographer at the Herald Tribune sent out and lasted the first day, and that was it. He was so saddle sore he couldn't take it. And I knew we were in trouble the first time because he came out to my ranch the weekend before and picked out a horse to ride. He didn't have a clue. And when he got up, he was facing backwards. I said, no, you want to turn around in the saddle. You don't want to be facing backwards. You at least want to see the limbs coming at you. And so we had a good time. And then when Mabry was elected to the commission, of course, at that time, the county was very much environmentally aware of things. That's when they went into the buying properties and that sort of thing for environmental awareness. And that was what I reported on, was science and environmental affairs, because my minor, I had a bachelor's in agriculture and a minor in environmental writing and environmental engineering, actually. And then I had another post-bac in journalism, and never earned my master's, but I did have that. And so that's the way I was hired. It was between St. Pete Times, Sarasota Herald Tribune, and Fort Myers News Press. And St. Pete Times wouldn't wait for me to finish my master's research. They wanted me immediately, and I wanted to get the master's, and so I went with Herald Tribune.
Okay.
And that was hometown anyhow.
Yeah.
I knew my way around here. I didn't know anything about St. Pete. And I knew my way around Fort Myers because my dad had an office in Fort Myers. But I'd rather be here.
Mabry, for all that he was known for in terms of conservation, public awareness, education about agriculture, land conservation, land acquisition, water management, was also, he wasn't anti-growth.
Well, no, you couldn't be. You couldn't be, really, because whether you were or not, it was going to happen.
What?
The climate and the coast and everything, there's no way to stop it. It's going to happen, whether you're for or against it. And I don't think that, of course, Homer Hooks at the phosphate industry would argue with me, but I don't think we were anti-growth as much as that we insisted that growth should be done properly. And I think when you look at Sarasota County today versus the counties on either side, in any direction, you kind of have to argue that we got it right to a certain degree, because the communities I see here that are growing are doing so in a more organic manner, and in not having, to my way of thinking, the traffic issues that you have in Manatee are horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're bad in Sarasota too, but I go to Manatee quite a bit, and my gosh, Cortez Road, 26th Street, 51st Street. I mean, it's worth your life sometimes to go out there. East 64th,
Right.
State Road 64. I go that way sometimes. It's
I think Mabry really he created a sense of balance, that he led the way for other commissioners, elected officials to view the future and not be so. And we had commissioners that were,
Oh yeah, adamant. Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's true. I believe you're right. and that's what I criticize in today's legislative and congressional climate. There's no conversation across the aisle. There's no willingness to negotiate, meet people in the middle, give a little, get a little. It's my way or the highway.
And would you relate that to Mabry a little bit? How you felt like?
I think so, and
No, I mean, would you relate that story as if you were talking about Mabry fostering that kind of?
yes, and I think also Mabry's election paved the way for folks like Buster, for instance, because they continued that attitude. It's a fine thing for Mabry to have had it, but it could have been lost in the next generation of commissioners, and it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I would say that that's where that started, where that came from. I think, of course, Jim Neville promoted it too. Jim was a little bit further the other way than Mabry was. And in fairness, Jim didn't have the perspective that being a major landholder gives you when you own real estate and property. Don't forget, Mabry, early on when I first contacted him, he was really worried about Northport's growth opening up that highway to come through his southern part of the ranch on the south side of 72. And that worried him a lot, because at the time GDC was pushing, and of course that would have been a gold mine for them had that happened.
Mm-hmm.
That would just have been a gold mine for them, and it worried the heck out of him, because he looked at that and knowing that his argument in Tallahassee would be, well, hey, look, we're a productive cattle ranch. You can't just condemn my land for a highway. Well, yeah, they can, and he knew they could.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was self-interest at work, of course. But on the other hand, look at what the county has gained as a result of it. I mean, we're a landmark county in the state of Florida almost as much as Martin County, which was always the environmentally aware county. Well, you got to put Sarasota right up there at the top of the list too, because we have these assets that are marvelous public protection of what water recharge and resources and things of this nature that we have. We don't have a lot. We've always counted on our groundwater coming down from Polk County, but we need to preserve what we have here too, and that's pretty well done. Sarasota County's in a good position because of Mabry's awareness and agricultural ethos.
And don't you think that also was what helped foster his very strong view on property rights, private property?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. I mean, anytime you own land like he has and I have and Buster have for a number of years, that's paramount. That's absolutely, Mabry and I and Buster and, the rest of us that own significant
Hi-hat.
property, Hi-hat certainly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's what part of the Mabry's thing was, my perception representing developers over the years was, but also representing the MacArthur Foundation. In fact, being with Mabry the day before he died with Dick Nelson helping negotiate that acquisition was, you could count on Mabry to be fair.
Absolutely.
And, in the urban area, if there was utilities and water and your zoning was in place, or you were consistent with land, he would vote for it.
Sure.
There was not a question.
Sure.
Where he was, others were not like that. I mean,
Mhm.
Mabry really, I think, set himself apart where you knew going in that if you had your T's crossed and I's dotted, you could count on a fair shake
Right.
from him.
Right. Right.
Do you want to comment on that?
But he wanted those standards. He wanted those standards to be met, and that was appropriate. That's good planning. That's good planning, because then your growth occurs in an organic manner, and you're not leapfrogging, and you're not getting something that is not sustainable and costs more than it should. If you have those utilities and all those things in place, it only makes sense that you grow in that sense organic. You expand in that manner.
Mm-hmm.
And he recognized that. Of course, he also recognized it was going to be many generations before it gets this far out.
If ever.
And that's true, if ever. And we had an opportunity, for instance, in 1951 or 2, my family had the opportunity to purchase the tract that was at the intersection of Fruitville and Verner Roads.
Mm-hmm.
On the, what would that be? The northwest corner.
Northwest, I guess.
Northwest corner. And we looked at that and flew it. And and then we had another opportunity to buy just north of Lynn Harrison up here on Sidell Road, County Line, which becomes County Line
Right.
Road. And I was in the Army at the time. And my dad wrote me and said, well, I took a flight to Fort Pierce, and in doing so, we flew over Sidell Road. And I've decided against that property because I could only see the tops of the fence posts because it had flooded to that degree. And he said, I don't know where we'd put our cattle. If we bought that land, every inch of it is underwater.
Well, now that's just to the north of where we are sitting.
That's correct. That's correct. But you didn't have the drainage improvements that you have today. It was before that happened. And he said, so I've turned my attention back to Fruitville and that intersection, Fruitville and Verner Road. And then I don't know what exactly changed his mind on that, except that Murray Harrison, who's Lynn's cousin, I think, came to him, and Murray wanted to divest himself of this property, which was 6,000 acres at the time, and move north of Manatee River. And he had cattle. And Dad looked at it and flew it and everything. He said, I like this property, but I can't do 6,000 acres. It's too much for me. And so Murray agreed to cut a piece out of it that was 2,830 acres originally. And that squared off with the park and everything,
Okay.
and got Murray away from the park, because he was having issues with the park, and he still had issues on his west line, but it got the whole south line away from it for him. And so that's what we ended up purchasing, and Clyde Keys from St. Petersburg purchased the rest. And then we had access by easement across Keys' property. Well, Keys was one of these fellows that would come out in his Cadillac and throw matches during the dry season and drive home to St. Pete and just let it burn. And that was his pasture management plan. And he burned us out one time up on and
In touch with Mabry, and we're involved with him over
we
all
did.
these years.
We did, and yes, and Mabry was real good to us, and I worked here just one for the series of articles I did on old time cow work, and I learned a lot from that.
Yeah.
Learned a lot from that. It was a weekend, was all it was, but I learned a lot
Yeah.
from that.
What would you like to say in terms of the Argus Foundation as a community business leadership honoring Mabry with their Lifetime Achievement Award?
Well, I think it's very, very much appreciated. Very, how can I say? It's a great honor, and very well deserved. Mabry loved this county, he loved these woods, and that extended to north and south, and of his property, and he liked, you know, look at the home he's made for his family and everything out here. And I really can relate to that. I lived on our ranch for a couple of years, but my wife, who thought she would love it, turned out, one, she's allergic to cows and horses.
Got it. While you're living on Loma Linda.
And I have a funny story about that. We used the same path through some Arcadia, and I had 18 replacement heifers, 20 replacement heifers that had to have their shots on schedule to go into the herd, because we have always maintained a brucellosis-free herd, a disease-free herd. And the day he came out, I was alone. It was a Monday morning or Tuesday morning. I couldn't get cowboys. So my wife was my cowboy, helping me work these cattle and get them in the crowd and shoot. So when he comes out, he drives up in his little truck and he picks up his bag and he walks over to the pens to, you know, and they got the cows all lined up in the crowd and shoot, ready to put them through for him, and I'm driving them and she's closing the gate on their heads and all this sort of thing. And he takes one look, walks back to his truck and starts to drive away. Now I've taken a day off from work at the newspaper to do this, and Ed Pierce ain't gonna let me take another day off. And so I run across the pens and I run out there, Dr. Matthews, where are you going? What's the matter? And I thought, well, maybe he'd lost, you know, maybe he'd forgotten an important medicine or something he had to have. But I needed to know. And he said, I won't work for a man who treats his wife like that. I said, what are you talking about? He said, look at her. She's red in the face and she's crying. You must have whipped her or something to get her down here to help you. And I said, Dr. Matthews, I said, she's not upset. She's allergic to cows. And it's hot morning. It was like a July morning or something. And the dander's in the air and everything. And she's reacting because she's allergic, you know. And he said, he asked her. He came over and said, is that true? He said, yes, I'm allergic to cows and horses, particularly when they get hot and sweaty and everything. And so he came back and he did his work and gave them their inoculations and everything.
That's funny.
And I learned to hire me a cowboy.
Yeah. I'll bet you did.
Yeah.
All right, well that's great.
Good.
Thanks, Alan.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
But no, Mabry, I couldn't say enough good things. I just about his leadership and everything. And this county has benefited greatly from his participation and his influence, and particularly the eastern rural parts of the county, because it could have gone the way other counties have gone, and everybody would suffer for the consequences.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you, sir. Years ago in the 40s, it happened. I was in Sarasota. It took off season. Just shut her down.
Well, with my family still here, we're down 3, 4, 5 times a year, but we don't notice a lot of difference anymore. I mean, obviously it's more crowded in the winter, but it seems to be crowded still in the summer now.
Well, we're getting a lot.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we get a lot of Europeans that come in the summer.
Oh, yeah.
And, Canadians come year round. They don't care how hot. You know,
Right, right, yeah. Yeah.
Jeff, talk to me a little bit about how you got to know Mabry, and was it before you were sheriff or once you
Yes.
became sheriff?
No, I came to the sheriff's office in 1977, and Mabry, I think, became a county commissioner in 1980. But he'd been involved with the sheriff's office back into the 60s. He's one of the original mounted patrol special deputies with the sheriff's office. So then when he was elected to the county commission, I was serving as the chief deputy at that time and acted many times for the sheriff. So we had a relationship professionally as commissioner and chief deputy. Also through our range deputy program, Mabry was part of the Cattlemen's Association. So occasionally I would attend those meetings and would see him in a social setting. And then of course when I became the sheriff in 1984, you may remember the history. At that time, there was not a good relationship between the county commission and the former sheriff. And therefore they also put on the ballot, since we were a charter county, that you could put different things on, and they decided, well, we're going to make it a Department of Public Safety, and whoever wins the 1984 sheriff's election will become the first executive director of the Department of Public Safety. Well, I was fortunate enough to be that person. I'll never forget, I can't tell you the exact time or the date, but I got a call from Mabry after the election. He said, Jeff, we got to get this thing reversed. He said, with you going to be our sheriff, everything's going to be okay. Well, again, being a charter county, you could put something back on the ballot. I don't know if it had to be within 90 days or what the exact term was. But it got back on the ballot, and it passed. I think it was 70+% of the people said, yes, we wanted to go back to a sheriff's department. And Mabry was an instrumental part in that whole campaign. And so it went from there.
Describe what Mabry and others, but you know, where this is about Mabry, what a special range deputy does, how they're deputized.
Well, a special deputy at that particular time simply was appointed by the sheriff, did not have to have any kind of training or anything, was given a badge and a card showing his identification. The mounted patrol obviously rode horses and were able to go in and help with searches and do various things. As a matter of fact, later on in the sheriff's office history, we created our own mounted patrol where we had specific deputies, and that was their job, and they had their own horses. It was interesting because later, and this shows you what the quality of person that Mabry was, a law passed or the police standards and training changed the rules. But late in the 80s, they no longer said that a sheriff could appoint a special deputy. If he was going to do that, then that special deputy had to have a certain number of hours of training in various courses. So I pretty much ran my office by doing what we were supposed to do, and here I am as the sheriff, and Mabry is one of the 5 people that allows us to get the money to run the sheriff's office. And I had to go tell Mabry, hey Mabry, if you want to still be a special deputy, I'm going to have to take your card back if you don't go get training. Well, he didn't have time for that, but he fully understood, and just like myself and wanted to do things right, he readily understood. He gave the card back. Well, I made him an honorary deputy and took care of that real quick. But that was the kind of man that Mabry was. Of all the county commissioners that I worked with over the years, Mabry was probably in the top 2, if not the #1 person. And the reason I say that is he never thought of Mabry. He never thought of politics. He thought of what was the right thing to be done, what was the best thing to be done for the people. And that's what he did. And if it negatively affected him, so be it. And that's kind of like it was taking away a special deputy. Hey, I would like to have it, but I understand that's the way things have to be. Go ahead and take it, and we'll move on. He's just a real quality person. And I mentioned the Cattlemen's Association. As the sheriff, I tried to attend those meetings once or twice a year. And Sarasota County was, and I'm sure still is, even though I've been gone for 15 years, just a great place. Had a lot of good people in it. But when you would go to a Cattlemen's Association meeting, there was just something different about the folks that raise cows and have farms and produce grapefruit and oranges and that live off the land, and they were just down-to-earth good people. And that's what Mabry was. He was just a fine, quality human being, and just very sad the day that he lost his life, and the community lost a great asset. But Barbara and the girls have just continued right on and just done an outstanding job. I mean, you look at the success of their daughters, and as I wrote to Governor Scott when I was trying to help the judge get her position to be appointed, my comment was that both Lisa and her sister did not fall far from the tree, because Mabry and Barbara were just real quality people, and have raised quality young people for their children. And now they're blessed with grandchildren. We all love our children, but boy, we really love our grandchildren. Anything else, any funny story you have, Mabry, or that you recall? I don't recall any funny things about Mabry. Mabry had some peculiarities in the way he would laugh and maybe lisp or stutter once in a while, a little bit like that, but just added to, I won't call it the mystique, but the character of the man. And as I said, I don't think you could ask for a better friend. He was there for you through thick and thin, and he served this county well.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to make a comment about the Argus Foundation, the business leadership of the community honoring him?
Well, I think it's a great thing. I can recall, because I want to say it was in the mid to early 80s probably when the Argus Foundation was begun. And of course I knew a lot of the folks that were involved in that, and I'm sure some of them still participate in that. And it's a great group. It's a lot of things that go on in Sarasota County. This county is blessed. From the arts to the beach, to 20 minutes later you're sitting out at the Mabry Carlton Reserve in the middle of crocodiles or alligators and all kinds of wildlife, and it's just a great place. And there's a lot of good organizations like Argus, the Cattlemen's Association, and many other things that the people here know that this is a gem of an area, and they do a lot to help it. And so I congratulate them. It's wonderful that Mabry is being honored this way, and I know that Barbara's been honored for many things, and the girls right along with them. I mean, it's just an outstanding family, and happy to know them.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay?
Let me get that microphone real quick.
Yeah, let's not forget that.
Where are your kids? Your kids are here in Sarasota?
Yeah, my son is a airline pilot. He actually flies out of Atlanta, but he is here. And our daughter is one of two deputy court administrators, works for Walt Smith.
Yeah.
I might not be alive today.
Yeah.
I'm wrong.
And the ranch would have gone to pot.
Yeah. Yeah. What, actually, about that, how do Mabry run this ranch and do so much with, I mean, the cattlemen's, the state legislature, the county?
He was a busy man, and he had a good helper with Barbara. And
because that's, I mean, he did a lot, if you think about it. I mean, again, the Cattlemen's Association fighting the...
brucellosis is what I remember. He and I did a lot during that time.
Describe what that is.
Are we on a, oh, we are. I didn't know that.
I got you.
Yeah, we made, that was, you know, it was a state and federal program to try to eradicate a disease of cattle called brucellosis. And it was, the program was reasonably successful, but the main thing it did, it caused a rift between cattlemen and cattlemen's families all over the state, because the way the program was run, and Mabry and I, we didn't always agree on everything, but we did a lot of work together. We made several trips to Tallahassee to talk with the legislature and the state veterinarian and Commissioner of Agriculture, and about the program. And it was a tense time, really, between a lot of people, and but we managed to muddle through, and I think everybody came out reasonably friendly after that, but it cost a lot of us a lot of money over a lot of years, and to comply with the program.
Was it ultimately effective?
They seem to think it was. I think maybe it was mainly just the disease spent its time and faded out.
I understand, or I remember Mabry and you and Dallas Dorr, maybe, I don't remember all who, Turner,
Yeah.
worked to preserve the ag exemption when John Micas was trying to get it overturned.
We
Tell
hired,
us about that story.
we hired,
Lamar.
Lamar Matthews. And I hate to say this, but Lamar made a monkey out of the opposition, out of the county.
Property appraisal.
And we, and the, you know, the adjustment board, I guess it was, they went along with us, you know, and we did. We got our exemption as we should have.
Mabry was instrumental in that, though.
Yes, yes, he was, and Lat, and I don't know, Buck Hawkins.
Oh, God, Buck, yeah. What, your family's been here a long time. I think it was in the 50s that the Carlton, they could see open range going away and decided to change their business plan about buying land where they would fence it. Where were you in that time in terms of the Longino Range?
Well, at that time, you know, we were in the turpentine business. We didn't have a cow, and it was. Well, you're going back a little bit before me.
No, but I mean, I don't know about your family, but my understanding was that Mabry's dad, and I guess grandfather, they saw the closing of the open range.
Yeah, Uncle Tom Carlton, Mabry's granddaddy, figured he better buy land. So they bought land about the same time my father was buying land for turpentine. And it was during that time when most of the land around here was going for, you know, tax deeds, tax sales. And so they all would go to these auctions. And Carlton's went. I remember lawyer Whitehurst, I think it was, from Wauchula, represented the Carlton interest there at those sales, and Dad and Mr. Buck Daughtry, Uncle Buck Daughtry, who he lived right down the road here a piece, and but he had a lot of cattle, and he'd been in the cow business. He ran cattle open range for many years, you know, way back there. And my dad was telling Uncle Buck, he said, you know, Buck, if you don't start buying some land, Tom Carlton's going to own you. He's going to buy everything around. You won't be able to step outside your house because Carltons are going to own it all. And so Buck started going to these sales with Dad, and Dad bought, actually Buck bought half township, and Dad bought the half township north of that, and that's how we got to own some land.
So that was about the same time. So the Carltons and the Longinos were
All buying land.
figuring it out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it was, that was in 1934.
Oh, okay.
Going back that far. And my dad ran a turpentine operation on our land, and he leased other land too. He leased the Daughtry land and probably some of the Carlton land and to turpentine. But it was not until 1948 when Fuller Warren was governor, and they passed what they call the no fence law. And that meant that it was kind of a misnomer, but it meant you had to fence your cattle off the highways. Back then, when you drove down a highway anywhere here in Florida, especially in South Florida, there was slaughter on the road. There were dead cows everywhere and wrecked cars, and because the highways were the best place for cattle to graze, because they cleared the right of way for the highway, so that's naturally where the cows went, and that's when they passed that law that you had to fence your cattle off of the highway.
Mm. Another area you and Mabry were strong in was conservation, both for land and water.
Yep.
Didn't you both grant conservation easements over your property or portions of the property?
Yes, we did. We did.
Talk about that a little bit.
It's worked out beautifully for us, and I think it has for Barbara too.
Explain what it is, though.
All right, the conservation easement is that you're basically giving up your development rights, and we were able to sell our easements and to the state. You know, both the Water Management District and Florida Forever, various funds, and the county. And the county had funds to buy some conservation easements. And so what you were doing, you were selling your development rights, but you were still able to utilize the land. You still owned the land, and you were responsible for the land. You paid taxes on the land, but you were not able to develop it any more intense than it already was. And so if it was in improved pasture, why, you could maintain that improved pasture. If it was in timber, you could maintain and operate that timber. You could run cattle. You could do, as long as you followed best management practices, you could do what you were already doing. But you couldn't put a road in or build a house or anything of that nature. So it basically, and this all came about after Northport started developing down there, you know. And first off, the Mackle brothers, and then General Development bought all that land and started building roads and things. And
You were worried about a road coming up north.
yeah, Mabry and I talked about that numerous times. State Road 39, it would have been, as it comes south from up around, Dade City or somewhere, but it would come right between us, Carlton's. I think it would go right down Sugar Bowl Road here. And we didn't particularly want that. Because Mabry and I were both wanted to maintain a cattle ranch and keep the land like it was. And we weren't particularly interested in developing any of our land as subdivisions and commercially or anything like that. We wanted to preserve our land. And, I think both of us seem to have that ethic of land preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Is your ranch all in Sarasota County?
Yep.
And so is the Carlton Ranch.
Yep.
But years ago, State Road 72 wasn't even, you were going to Arcadia and Wauchula more than you were Sarasota probably, right?
Well, Mabry probably was, but I wasn't, because I did a lot of business going to Arcadia, yeah. That's where a lot of my business contacts were. But well, I was born and raised. I was born in Jacksonville, but I was raised in Bradenton, and my dad still lived there, and that was sort of home. Then when I got married, we moved to Sarasota, and south of Sarasota there, and I used to drive out here every day on that old highway.
Dirt road.
Yeah, but it was not dirt. It would have been better had it been dirt. It was crowned and it was rough as a cob, and you couldn't go over 30 miles an hour on it.
Yeah, yeah.
But I drove that road a lot, and in fact, I kept driving that road up until we moved out here, which was way later. It was in '82.
How many times a year did you have to change shocks?
I wore out a lot of old wrecker cars on that road. I had a next door neighbor when we lived in town there, and who was a used car salesman. He had a car lot, and about once a month at least, he would present me with a new old car, and I'd trade in that junker I had because it was shot driving out here, and so I had a lot of cars back then.
What you've done this a couple times. You know, the Argus Foundation is business leadership, and what does it mean to have somebody like Mabry, and you've done Latin side before, ag guys? What does it mean to have this kind of honor for Mabry?
Well, I think it's wonderful. I think it's well deserved, as it was for those other guys. You know, they were all good friends of mine, and I think it's a wonderful thing for them and their family. You know, because after all, maybe they are aware of what we are doing down here now, but at least they could have had the satisfaction to know that their family would receive this honor, and I think it's a wonderful thing for them.
You want to talk just a second about, you know, Barbara? I mean, Mabry's death was incredibly tragic, but she and the girls really kept on going.
She sure did. I was so proud of Barbara. You know, she right shortly after Mabry's death, Barbara was made elected or nominated or appointed the Cattle Woman of the Year. But did you go to Tampa with us on that excursion?
No, but the plaque is right up there.
Oh yeah, and so we were very proud of our neighbor and friend, Barbara.
And being able to carry.
But, to keep on running the ranch, and she very ably kept the ranch running, and still does. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Buster, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk about a good friend.
Yeah, he was terrific. Well,
It looks like you too.
there you go.
All right. Well, you can just talk to Bruce and ignore the camera.
All right.
How did you come to know Mabry? Was it when you first? I guess you were on the commission first, right?
No, Mabry and I ran at the same time in late '79, and he ran for District 3. I was running for District 5, and I got to know him very well at that time.
And you both won.
Fortunately, yes.
Yeah. Talk about how you came to know Mabry as you both got on the commission, and you were obviously a little more experienced politically. Although Mabry worked with the legislature and having been on the planning commission, certainly had his feet wet. But how did you get to?
Well, Mabry had a vast knowledge of local government at the time. He had come from the planning commission, and I had had some experience within the city council. Both of us were learning local county government together, The primary thing I learned from Mabry is what old Florida was really like. He would remind us of that often. I remember one time coming out to the ranch. As I was driving along in the car, I saw this lonely figure sitting asleep on the top of a horse, walking along the fence row, heading back. It was Mabry, and that's just stuck in my mind all these years as that's old Florida.
Yeah.
But I gained a great respect for Mabry's knowledge of old Florida and his family history. And so serving with Mabry became not only a duty as a county commissioner, but also a great pleasure.
You know, you're, I think, one of the great legacies was your intense desire to see consolidation of the utilities. I remember when I moved here, there was, I think it was 124 or something, separate franchises. And you moved to be the leader on that. And I found it interesting that Mabry was the leader on, that was sort of the urban side of it, and then the long-range conservation side, both from a land and water conservation, you know, is Mabry. And talk a little bit about how you guys, because obviously as an article like that, you were the two spearheads of that process and that conversation.
Well, as far as the utilities is concerned, we had, as I remember, it was around 113 to 120 private utilities that were established by earlier commissions for developers who wanted to develop property, and the county at that time felt it would be more appropriate to have those developers provide private utilities, and so they did. And when the developers provided those utilities, they virtually gave it away. I mean, they were charging rates for water and sewer that made no sense at all because the developers were primarily concerned with selling the property, developing their land. But as that development got completed, the developers began to lose interest in operating a utility that was not making money, and they would file for rate increases at the time that were rather massive, but appropriate because of the law that governs rates for utilities. And so the commission found itself in a position of granting massive rate increases, very politically unpopular at the time.
Yeah.
But the biggest problem was that the developers at the same time were neglecting maintenance on many of these facilities, and they were starting to fail. And at that point, Mabry and I felt that it would be appropriate if we began consolidating those utilities, because many of those utilities had clauses in their original franchises that required them to hook to a county utility if it were ever established. And so it turned out very well. At the same time, Mabry's primary goal at that time was to support Jim Neville's earlier efforts in acquiring the MacArthur Tract. And his whole life became the acquisition of the MacArthur Tract to protect the environmental capabilities and provide the county with a permanent water source. And I remember him being out many times. We would cross paths and we were going around to various organizations trying to get people to support the bond issue, which would be a taxpayer-backed bond issue. And I remember making something like 113 or 14 individual speeches, maybe basically the same thing. And that turned out successful. We're very pleased. A signature accomplishment for Mabry's time on the board.
That and the idea of land conservation, selling the development rights. Buster Longino Ranch did it too. I think is another big part of the legacy. Can you talk about that? Because I remember, I think that was near the end of your commission, or it might have been in the middle, I don't know. And it was whether, well, you could sell the easement rights, but we didn't want to use them for transfer development rights, just wanted the conservation easement.
Well, there's two ways of approaching that. The
And
county,
maybe a big
yes,
driver of that.
The county has adopted, the citizens of the county have adopted the millage for purchase of conservation type lands here in Sarasota County. And that program has been very successful. But when the county buys lands, it usually is offered property that includes areas that can be developed and should be developed because they're in the urban sections of the county. And so the county has acquired these lands and now finds itself with large portions of land, and certain portions of that could be sold off for development, or we could transfer the development rights of the property to another location, thereby lowering the cost of the acquisition of the land itself. And so the county has that option of doing that, and that was, again, something that Mabry supported, and we were successful in getting that done.
What, do you know this story? I just heard it today, but that Mabry had a 10-story rope ladder in his office?
Well, one of our local newspapers at the time used to poke fun at the county commission from time to time. But in all seriousness, Mabry had a rope made from his office on the 10th floor of the administration building, had an eyelet bored in the floor, and so he could hook the rope on the eyelet, so if the building ever caught fire, he could lower the rope and climb down the rope to the outside. It made a lot of sense at the time, but he got a lot of ribbing over it. And the newspaper printed a picture of him climbing down the rope on their front page.
I totally forgot about that, but that's a great story.
Mabry had a great sense of humor. I remember one time when I was coming out to have coffee with him here on the ranch, and I got in my airplane and I flew out here, and I was going to land out here on Mabry's landing strip.
Slidell Road.
And I made a low pass over the landing strip, and I noticed the grass was a little long, but I thought, well, all right, I'll give it a try. So I landed on the runway out here, and the minute I hit the ground, I knew I'd made a mistake because the grass grabbed the wheels and it stopped. I mean, I didn't roll very far. So I gave it full power, parked the airplane, came in, had coffee with Mabry. And when we decided to leave, I said, Mabry, I'm not sure I can get out of here, you know, with the grass like, and so he says, oh, don't worry about it. He says, just back her up there to the fence out here and give her full power. And he says, if you don't make it, I'll get the mower out and we'll cut the grass. I reminded him, if I don't make it, I may not be able to watch you cut the grass. And that was his humor. I know another time we were in New York signing bonds for the county, actually on the purchase of the Carlton Reserve. And that evening we were out walking the streets of New York, he and I, and it was sort of dark and dingy, and there were a lot of characters around that you weren't really sure about. And I said, Mabry, I don't know whether we should be out here walking the streets of New York this time of night. He reached in his pocket and says, don't worry about it. He pulls out this little pocket knife and whips open the blade and says, as long as I got this, nobody's going to bother us. So that was Mabry.
He was the first Crocodile Dundee then.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
That's funny.
He had a great sense of humor.
You want to share what your thought is about the Argus Foundation giving Mabry this honor?
I think it's a wonderful tribute to Mabry. Argus Foundation has had a good positive purpose here in Sarasota County. There are times I personally have been at odds with some of the recommendations of Argus, but I've never doubted the fact that Argus had the community's best interests at heart. The people that are on the board are members of Argus Corporation, are leaders in the community, and the fact that they're recognizing Mabry for the good work he's done is exemplary, and I think he deserves every bit of it.
Great. That's great.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob.
Cameron,
Yeah.
the first spontaneous one will be funnier than the...
Well, yeah, it's not a belly laugher, but I got a big kick out of it when Bill Thompson, you remember Bill Thompson was around here for years? I think he's moved to
All
Georgia
right, so
now.
you're going to talk to Bruce and pretend like nobody else is in the room. How about that?
Okay,
Just talk to Bruce.
okay. Tell me when you're ready.
You're good.
Good to go?
Yeah.
Great. Yes, Mabry was a pillar of the community, obviously. He thought in 25 to 50-year segments. I mean, we can thank him today, truthfully, and his peers at the county for the central water supply that we've got, the negotiation that brought us the Ringling-MacArthur tract. Before that, we had been going to Manatee hat in hand, Manatee County for water. We can thank him for driving down a 6-lane Bee Ridge Road now. I remember when he went through the expansion of the road, I was kind of laughing because there was a cemetery right there, what is now McDonald's, and it was a private cemetery, and moving a cemetery is a really serious legal event. And I remember raising the issue with him, and he, with that smile of his, would say, "It's already taken care of." And he had thought ahead and gone to every single one of the family members that they could find in that cemetery and told them, "We're going to have to move the grave a few feet and so forth," and they'd accept it. So that was great. The other thing I think about when I think about Mabry is the wonderful family that he left us. I mean, Barbara and he would be very proud of the two girls, Judge Bonner, Kim Bonner, and her daughter, and Lisa, of course, and their three children. She was a senator, a representative, and they've just done yeoman work for our community. And I know he'd be thrilled to death with them, and of course we're thrilled to death with what they've done with it.
How did you meet Mabry first? How did you get to know him?
I was one of his city friends that I think he realized he had to reach out to, because he was an agriculture man, and he wanted to better the community, and he was a Democrat at the time, and I happened to be a Republican, and he lost a race for legislature as a Democrat. And I remember him sitting in my house we must have sat there 3 or 4 hours, and he was trying to convince me how he was a good Southern conservative Democrat and the Republicans ought to support him. And I said, "I'm sorry, you're just playing for the wrong team and you're not going to get elected." Well, he finally did change his party, and he told me later his dad didn't talk to him about politics for 2 years after that. So God bless him, but he did wonderful things for the community. The other story I think about, speaking of the water, was I was sitting at my house at dinner. We just sat down, just said prayers, kids were at the table, and the phone rang. So I answered it, and it was Mabry, and he had gotten the hydrologist's report on the Ringling-MacArthur tract to determine if there was, commercial viable quantities of water. And he said, "Can I read this to you?" I said, Sure, Mabry, go ahead." And Susan and the kids were sitting there kind of waiting for me, and he started reading. And it soon became pretty obvious he wasn't going to read me the executive summary. He read me the entire hydrologist's report, which was 30 or 40 pages. It took an hour and a half, and Susan kept saying, "Come sit down." And I said, "No, this guy's on a roll. We're not going to bother." He was so thrilled that they found viable quantities of water for the county on there. And of course, it relieved us from depending on Manatee County and other sources of water. Now we have a wonderful interconnected water supply.
He was also critical, along with Bob Anderson, in consolidating the utilities in this county.
Right. Central sewer and stormwater.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there was like 129 separate franchises when I moved here.
Right.
He was central to all of that.
Yeah. Well, the other interesting story I remember Bill Thompson actually told me this story years ago, that when Mabry and he were freshman pledges at Stetson University, he and Bill got road tripped, where the fraternity takes a pledge out. They had left them in their underwear in the trunk of the car. They drove out from DeLand a number of miles, many miles, and dumped them out on the side of the road. And this is at 10, 11 o'clock at night or something. And Bill told me that Mabry said when their eyes got adjusted to the light, he said, wait a minute. He said, "I think I got kin live right down that road." And they walked down to his family member's house, who drove them back to Stetson. They beat the fraternity brothers back to Stetson. They never road tripped him again.
That's a great story. So, what would you say to the Argus Foundation for honoring Mabry?
I deeply appreciate it, and I think sadly there are many people in the room that are benefiting from Mabry's vision and his persistence, but it is really commendable that we've had some wonderful posthumous recognitions over the years, and recognizing Mabry 25 years after his death I think is wonderful, and it'll allow another generation to understand how important he is and was to the community, and the legacy that he left, which is exactly what Argus wanted to do, was recognize the pillars of the community.
Okay, good. That's great.
Enough?
Yeah.
Good.
That's perfect. Thank
Well, good.
While you're here,
So we're, on camera though, you need to talk about Jimmy Harrison. That's the most interesting person in the
Yeah,
family.
he was colorful, wasn't he? He was colorful.
He's a piece of work.
Let me say, gentlemen, I consider myself privileged to be among you fellas here today, and I don't know that I told Jim outside, I don't know really if I can offer much that you can use, and I probably wouldn't be good at sound bites. You ask me questions, I'll try them, but I would like to give a little history of the place there at some point. He can edit out
No,
everything.
that's fine. Go ahead with that. That's good.
Well, you tell me when
Yeah,
you're
we're
ready.
ready, whenever you're ready.
Well, I'm Ken Harrison, and I grew up on the east end of Sarasota County in the 50s and the 60s. And at that time, 4 landowners owned most of that area east of the state park and down to what is now the north boundary of the city of Northport. Longino was there, and Carlton was there, and a family named Dortry was there. And our place was adjoining all of that, but in Manatee County. So we were all there together, and that thing was pretty stable. Those landowners bought that place in the 30s. All of them did. And you know, I remember growing up thinking, man, this place is going to be here like this forever. And you know, that didn't happen. But it was a good time and place to grow up. And my dad and Mabry were very close friends and neighbors. They lived 2 miles apart, and they enjoyed each other, and you know, they politicked together and did the things that neighbors do. They shared their equipment with each other and hauled each other's cattle back when they got out, and it was a great relationship. Mabry, I thought, was a special person. He was you know, he was talented in so many ways, and as I've just heard here recently from someone else, he was thinking into the future. But he was always fun to be around, and he did something out there for us that helped bring our little community together, those 4 landowners. He put up a tower, a radio tower, and we all chipped in, bought a repeater, and we bought radios for our vehicles and our homes, and it let us communicate. You know, this was before cell phones, and so I could talk to Mabry, and he could talk to my dad, and Mabry could talk to Barbara, and Buster's home base was called Tampensy. It's the name of an orchid that lives out there, and so we heard each other. We could communicate. It really made for a great area out there in Slidell. So you know, Mabry was. He was able to talk to us, to communicate with us. If you were in the cow pens, you know, he could communicate with cowboys, and then he could work 2 weeks in the pens and get in the car the next morning, drive to Tallahassee, and talk to the governor. He was, you know, he was I think a very a forward-thinking individual. He was the kind of guy that I think of Lisa. When I was thinking about this, Mabry was the kind of guy, if you had an issue, maybe we were all sitting at a table or meeting in the woods somewhere, we were talking that thing over, it was a problem, And Mabry, he'd cut to the chase. He'd make a short, brief comment, seemed to sum it all up. Many times it was a solution to the thing that made the most sense. And you thought, well, gee whiz, that'd work. You felt better after those short comments. Many times I've seen him do it. You felt better about whatever it is you were discussing. And he'd make you feel better about yourself. That's the effect that he had on me a lot of times. He'd interact with those cowboys out there. You know, a lot of times he'd cow hunt 2 weeks at a time. He'd hire 15 men, feed them 3 meals a day. And they'd play jokes on each other and just crazy stuff you can't imagine. And they'd go out there before daylight in the morning and saddle their horses, and they'd saddle Mabry's horse, but they'd put his saddle on backwards. And you know, when Mabry go out there to the stable and found it, you know, he'd just cackle, he'd laugh, he had a distinctive laugh, you know. So he got a kick out of that kind of stuff. And he told me one time, he said, I'm having trouble keeping my clothes washed in the summertime when it was raining every day. You know, he said, I'll wash them in the morning, that's no problem, while I'm eating breakfast. I take them outside and hang them on the line, and when I get home after dark, it's rained, so they're wet. Said they've been wet a week now.
you know, I don't know how to get them dry. And he'd laugh about that. You know, that was kind of good to him. He was a great guy, and like we have talked before, he was thinking about the future, about issues and problems that have become more extreme or maybe appeared and we didn't even recognize them at the time. Water supply is one that comes to my mind. He understood that groundwater, our traditional supply in this area, was at some point not going to be enough with our increased demand. And he understood that we needed to identify and develop other sources of water. Mm-hmm. And they added that well field out there, but Mabry understood the importance of surface water and reuse water and even desal water. He understood it was the most expensive one and probably would be developed the last, but he understood the importance of ensuring a sustainable, good quality supply of water mm-hmm. into the future. Mm-hmm. I think the same thing with residential development. He understood that we needed to be careful in how we develop this county and this part of the state, and to do it in such a planned, practical way that it would work into the future.
One of the things I found in practicing in front of the commission when Mabry was on it was, as aware as he was about maintaining the ag lands east of the county, and he understood that Sarasota was going to grow, and he wasn't anti-development. In fact, he was a very strong property rights guy, but he wanted it done right. And I always felt, you know, he held us, people like me and developers, to a higher standard because of his vote, you know. And but he did it in a gentle way, and if you cross your T's and dotted your I's, you could count on him.
Right. That was on my list also, was that I think Mabry was a person that understood the contributions that agriculture makes to society, to the citizens of this county and state and nation as well. He was part of that ag community. He was involved in producing food and fiber and fuel and protecting habitat. And he understood that as a social contribution. Mm-hmm. You know, they tell us we're only 2% of the population bona fide ag producers are, and he was one. And yet we produce the food and fiber for the other 98%. He understood that was important. Like you said, he tried to help ensure it in that part of the county. Mm-hmm. And it's been said before, but I will say it again. I think we are enjoying the fruits of the work that Mabry was involved in today with our water supply and how our development has occurred, protection of agricultural and ag land.
And creating the conservation easements. He and Buster both created those on their properties, and you know, I think it was just a phenomenal contribution. Think about it. Give up your development rights and ensure that you can stations, but a lot of people just don't get that. What a contribution that was.
Right. Well, I agree. It was my pleasure to have to know Mabry.
Great. All right. Yeah. Ken, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you.
Some of them are a little different, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Good. Go ahead.
Well, I'll wait. Is Charlie ready? Mm-hmm. I'm grateful that I was asked to participate in this interview process on behalf of the memory and of Mabry Carlton. There are four basic reasons. One is very selfish. When I came from Bradenton after practicing 3 years to a small firm made up of Davis Parker, Bill Harrison, George Dietz, Bill Getson, Jim Ritchie, and Monty Marshall, I was the next one, the seventh one, I believe, at the time. And my first client was a group that sized me up to see if a guy that started practicing Braden, as they called it, could pass the boot test. If you don't know what that is, ask somebody, they'll tell you. And it was the Board of Directors Steering Committee of the Sarasota County Cattlemen's Association. And it was made up of Lat Turner, my dear departed first cousin, whom I did know, B.T. Longino, Buster Longino, Buck Hawkins, Dallas Dort, and T. Mabry Carlton, whom I'd known because he graduated from Stetson a little before me, but had not known well. And I was interviewed because coming into Sarasota County was a tax assessor, now called property appraiser, that didn't believe in the Greenbelt Law, which is assessing agricultural lands at agricultural uses rather than their highest and best value, which keeps it possible to have agriculture. And after first trying to change the law unsuccessfully, this assessor attempted to try to find ways to increase the value of property, in his opinion, and he thought he would do it by asking cattlemen how many cattle they owned, how many head of cattle.
You can use Micah's name.
And for however many head of cattle, to ask a cattleman, ladies and gentlemen, how many head of cattle they had, is they might as well ask them how their wife looks in her pajamas. It's insulting, and it's not something anybody should do. He went so far as to lease a helicopter or use its time from the county to schedule flights where he would go out and count the cattle, since he couldn't hear it from the owners. Of course, we had wonderful friends, rural deputies, other friends everywhere that would know when the man scheduled his trips. And after 3 trips in which, when he flew over, all the cattle gates were open and every cow in Sarasota County was running to another pasture, he decided it was a bad idea, a waste of taxpayer money, and he went away. There then ensued 2 years of hearings on valuations in which the cattlemen came to town, looked commissioners in the eye, and we prevailed there. And so that was the first satisfied client I'd ever had in Sarasota, and without Mabry Carlton and all those other people, I might have been back in Sarasota, back in Braden, and doing abstract exams or something. Secondly, I'm grateful to Mabry Carlton because his leadership in allowing agricultural pursuits to be able to endure and prosper in this county. And he did it sacrificially. He did it by rezoning his own land out in East Sarasota to something like 1 unit for every 150 acres. What is the commercial or residential value of a property that for every 150 acres? He did that. Others have come along. The new way to do it is in preservation easements. The Longinos have done it. Alan Horton's done it. All kinds of people are doing it. And it benefits not just agricultural people, allowing them to keep their land for agriculture, but everybody that lives in an urban area would like to be able to drive 5 or 10 minutes and be in a sylvan scene of agriculture or farms or orange blossoms and things like that. And these people make it happen. And Mabry Carlton was a leader in that, not for just his sake, but for the county's sake. Finally, the Carlton Preserve, which began as a MacArthur Foundation property, I was privileged, and this time I'm on the other side. We're representing the MacArthur Foundation when Sarasota County filed eminent domain action and to condemn what at that time was the largest condemnation in Florida of land in single ownership. So Mabry was the representative of the county, principal lead negotiator, along with Dick Nelson, long-term county attorney. Many meetings out working with him, with us representing the foundation, and Mr. Nelson and Mabry for the county. He didn't even get mad at me. The condemnation went forward. We defeated the first eminent domain, with what the judge told me later was the definitive thing. The county had put all the water pipes above ground. This was going to be water and recreational, but they couldn't make the numbers work. And I kept calling it the low hurdles for the Florida panther. And with that, the judge denied the eminent domain. It was not going to help the panther and native species and so forth. And at that point, the case was settled, and the county ended up with what is now this wonderful resource for water, for the environment, for open space. And I thank Mabry for that, for his leadership. Even though we were on opposite sides, he allowed me to work with him to make that come work. Bruce Franklin, who I'm looking at right now, was also very instrumental in that, and seems to remember us being in his office the Friday before the circumstances that led to his death. And finally, I know it's been said by everyone, but I have to say that his family legacy, with the two daughters, one of whom served multiple terms in the Florida legislature and the Florida Senate. Senator Lisa Carlton was the senator that who on the last day of the session, when whoever is recognized, their bill gets passed, and if they're not recognized, it does not get passed. Every year, in her last several years, she was asked to be the one to preside because they knew she would be completely fair and objective regardless of party or cause or whatever, and served with such distinction. And then her sister, Judge Bonner, who is now a circuit judge and doomed for predicted for judicial greatness, having already served with distinction, and their wonderful grandchildren and in-laws. And then finally, Bruce Springsteen may be the boss in the music world, but the boss at the Carlton Ranch is Miss Barbara. Don't forget about Bruce Springsteen. She does not have a foreman. She gives the orders. She is such a rock, was so much for Mabry and for her children, has continued on. Her persistence and perspicacity, I think, are two words I looked up one time, would probably describe her. And so for all those reasons, I'm glad I had a chance to say something about him, and I thank you for asking me about it.
Good. Would you like to say a word about the Argus Foundation in this honor?
Well, I think it's great. I think it's great they did it. And they'll cut this part, but I think 25 years was a little long, but I think he is
Yeah,
wonderful.
we'll cut that part.
Wonderful, wonderful.
All right, that's great.
Is that enough?
Yeah,
That really is
perfect.
wonderful.